Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much. City Club members, friends, community members, welcome. My name is Jacob Thane, and I am your City Club of Central Oregon Board President. Really exciting day today, seeing you all here. Thanks to the lifting of the mask mandate, seeing everybody's faces. It's wonderful. Happy St. Patrick's Day. It is Women's History Month, so thank you to all the women leaders out here today. And yes, excellent. And for all you sports wonks out there, March Madness tips off today as well. For the first time since 2019, we are here in person for the City Managers Forum. This is always one of my favorite forums of the year and is one of our widest attended as well. We also want to make sure we say welcome to our virtual audience. And for those who are here today, please find information at your table on how to submit questions for our Q&A. And for those online, please look in the chat for information. Before we get started, I would like to thank our community, platinum, and gold sponsors and partners, ASI Wealth Management, City of Bend, Central Oregon Community College, OSU Cascades, Brooks Resources, and the Central Oregon Association of Realtors. And I grabbed the wrong script, and I forgot to grab the one with our presenting sponsors today. My apologies. Thank you to our presenting sponsors as well. If I can remember off the top of my head, Steele and Associates, yeah, Hayden Homes, and Skjersaa Group. Thank you, team. Also, I'd like to add that on your table, you'll find information about our tools of civility. As we go into the question and answer portion of our forum today, and especially in our conversations after the forum, we encourage you to refer to these tools of civility to help facilitate inclusive and respectful listening and conversations. Now, moderating our managers forum today is Tammy Baney, Executive Director of the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. Tammy has served as Deschutes County Commissioner, the Chair of the Oregon Transportation Commission, the Oregon Housing Stability Council, and the Central Oregon Health Council. What a great resume. She has served on numerous nonprofit boards and, of course, is a tireless advocate in our community. Please join me in welcoming Tammy Baney.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Okay, you're slightly taller than I am. Oh,
Hello,
everyone. Okay, so I always look like I might be popping by a funeral because I always wear black. But I thought I'd wear this just for a moment, kind of festive, because this is our first time together at St. Patty's. So where's Kim? Where's Kim? Kim, is this festive enough? Okay, good. All right. So there you have it. There's the hat. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. As mentioned, thank you. My name is Tammy Baney. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, and we are your Region's Council of Governments. And so I'm pleased to be here as your moderator. It was May of last year, and this was a very different setup on Zoom with these fine gentlemen, an opportunity for us to hold the City Managers Forum. And just a month before, if you'll all remember, that was May, in June, we had a celebration of the lifting of the restrictions. And that was so exciting because a week later, we sort of had a resurgence. And so I don't know about any of you, but I sort of felt like I was on that long boat ride where you're trying to find the shoreline and you're just like, please make it end. Please make it end. And so guiding the ships of our cities and trying to keep on course during those shifting winds were the 6 individuals seated in front of us today. So I'd like to go ahead and call you all up. It does look a little bit like either a game show or a dating show. So let's go ahead and get Eric King from the city of Bend. Let's get Keith Witcosky from the city of Redmond. Steve Forrester from the city of Prineville, Cory Misley from the city of Sisters-Gus Burril from the city of Madras, and Jeff Wullschlager, thank you, from the city of Pine. And I think yes. Okay, so the work of a city manager is anything but glamorous. Do you want me to sing, and then when I stop, everyone picks one?
One what?
A seat.
I make a lot of decisions.
He doesn't want to make any more decisions. Okay, so the work of a city manager is anything but glamorous or flashy. It's up at night, creatively strategizing to resolve tough issues while keeping a calm exterior. It's stuff like asphalt pavement conditions, effluent reuse, aerated lagoon treatment processes, stormwater improvements. It's really the kind of stuff that makes a dinner party end early. Or is it? Collectively, these 6 individuals oversee budgets totaling $665 million. $665 million of taxes and fees that are your hard-earned dollars. And so today we have an opportunity to hear from them, hear how that money is spent, what efforts they and their respective councils are taking to address pressing issues, and what they see on the horizon for our region. And so thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. And with the way that this setup is, I think I'm going to just go ahead and stay here. That might be a little easier. So the first question that I have is, let's start with an abbreviated state of your city in a way. When we met last year, you had a year under your belt of the pandemic, which I suspect helped with except for Jeff, you were coming in sort of, wow, look, new city and a pandemic, have
midstream.
fun. Yes, exactly. So you had an opportunity, though, to kind of see what was happening the year prior. Hopefully that helped with your budgeting. Hopefully that helped with being able to forecast for the second year. What does this reemerging look like now? And what surprised you from year 1 to year 2? How was your budget impacted, and did you fare better or worse than you had anticipated? So let's go first with Gus. I noted in your annual budget message that your revenues came in stronger than you had anticipated. And so building permit activity remained strong. Did this give you an opportunity to continue to provide services that maybe you thought you wouldn't be able to? And how did that impact your community?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. We literally 2 years ago in the budget message at this time of year, we were like, gosh, how do we forecast the pandemic? And I had worked for the city since 2005. I'd gone through the Great Recession that hit Madras particularly hard from about 2008, really through 2012, when we had to lay off a couple of police officers because the general fund was still under stress from that recession. And so I was immediately nervous. We cut tourism dollars. We stopped 2 different things, water sewer rate increases. We stopped a voter measure for transportation that we were going to put out, and just halted and started infusing dollars for urban renewal and economic help to our businesses that were getting shut down. And so it was a very different outlook, and not sure where we're going to end up. I'm happy to report that we hit property taxes come in above estimate. Our sewer and water held. We didn't have people leaving. We had people coming in. We literally had the Cross Key Inn. That owner said they've been turning so much business away the last few years that they went ahead and initiated and started a new hotel, and that was big for us. So those things were all great. And then this last year, ARPA dollars came in that was equivalent to about a year of property tax revenue for us that we got to share across a number of things. And so all in all, I'm happy to report we're doing well. There's stress on services because we have hundreds more people in our community. We're over 7,700, and in the recession we dropped down to like 5,900. And so we have the same number of police officers today as we had a decade ago, but we have almost the same number of administrative staff as a decade ago, and we have, town's grown whatever that number is, from 5,900 to 7,700. And so I'm proud of my team and all that, but now we have to figure out how to keep up with growth. So the positive is lots of positive things and a lot of new construction.
Excellent. Thank you, Gus. So I'm going to move to Eric. So you are the manager of the 6th largest city in the state of Oregon and one of the fastest growing cities on the West Coast. The roaring seas for you obviously look a little different than some of the smaller communities, but how has the past year been for the city of Bend?
Well, it's actually pretty similar to what
Very
Gus just
good.
talked about. We also had a transportation bond that we pulled
Mhm.
2 years ago. We we had 37 vacant positions that we cut. We really just kind of battened down the hatches because of the uncertainty, which I think actually prepared us in just keeping things just at a base level, and then we shot out of the cannon, and transient room tax revenue way beyond expectations. Just the amount of federal dollars, both with the CARES Fund and then the American Rescue Plan Act fund. So those are all good things, but we still have some structural problems with our general fund. So the property tax rate that Ben pays, the per capita rate, is actually on par with Madras. When you look at a per capita basis, we have very interesting tax systems that affect police, fire, and street maintenance. So those are still concerning for us in terms of our property tax revenue growth, even with all this fast growth, we're like 5% revenue growth, and our needs and our population growth are way beyond that. So we still have some challenges there.
Excellent, thank you. And I love, because I don't know that everyone would see the connection between a community of 7,700 and a community that's over 100,000. So I think that's an important thing to highlight. So Jeff, on to you. So the community of Lapine. So this was your first year, full year in the saddle. Tell us a little bit about how that has gone for the community of Lapine.
So Lapine finds itself in an interesting position. For most of you are probably aware to some degree, but for those of you that aren't, Lapine is now the youngest city in the state of Oregon with the demise of Damascus over in Clackamas County. That puts us at about 16 years of age. And while this sounds like I'm making light of it, there is some truth in that we're a 16-year-old child and we're trying to figure out what we're going to be when we grow up.
Yes, having raised a 16-year-old, I mean, I'm a little concerned.
So we're in this critical phase now where we need to find our direction. There's been some turnover in the first 16 years in terms of council and in terms of staff, although Corey did lay some great groundwork for me to follow when I arrived, and I appreciate that. In that vein, in a small community, a particularly small community like Lapine, you usually budget very conservatively because you can't depend on certain things every year. It's just sort of a process. I've always worked in small communities. With that in mind, I can say that those processes put in place by my predecessors have yielded nice results in terms of the amount of cash that we have on hand. And to give you some reflection of what that looks like, we were 1,600 people, I believe, at the 2010 census, and we were anticipated by the PSU Population Research Center to hit 2,600 by 2030. Well, the update in this last July put us over 2,600, so we're growing very rapidly. That compared to the dollars that we have, we're liquid of about $12 million. So for a city of 2,600 people, that's a very advantageous position to be in. It's a lot of money to work with, and we're fortunate in that regard. The challenges, and I know this is going to come out across the conversation this afternoon with my contemporaries up here, are it's great when you have money, but if there's nowhere to spend it or nobody to spend it on, then you have, internal challenges that I would say slow your growth. And so that's what we're struggling with right now. We're trying to balance our financial position with also getting enough people on staff. We have currently 4 people in the administrative unit, and I came from a city of 900 with 4 people in the administrative unit. So you can imagine the workload that we're handling. It's not just putting out competitive wages so that we can have the growth and manage the growth, but also providing them a place to live. And we'll expand on that throughout the conversation. But I can say the state of the city is that we're in a, like I said, advantageous financial position, and we're just figuring out the next steps at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Corey had been at the city of Lapine, now at the city of Sisters. And so does this resonate with you? Were you seeing an increase in tourism? And what would you add to the conversation as well?
Yeah, I could echo a lot of what's been said. Let me speak briefly on the organization of the city itself. And I want to give compliments as well to some of the predecessors, both staff and council in that community, that put in place things that help a organization stay stable through ups and downs. So Sisters has long had a gas tax. And that has helped to fund the streets department and take some pressure off the general fund to have to support some of those essential infrastructure investments, as well as, utility rates and system development charges, and making sure that our infrastructure is well funded and we're staying ahead of those needs. So a lot of kudos there. Transient lodging tax in Sisters did go up significantly over the pandemic. A lot of groundwork laid to make Sisters a destination over the decades. So credit given there as well. But, we've exceeded $1 million in our transient lodging tax revenue, and a significant portion of that does fund our general fund to support a contract with the sheriff's office for law enforcement. And then we're not a full service city. So what that means is we don't provide fire. Obviously, we don't provide library. There's a library district. There's a fire district. There's also a park and rec district that does programming. So in that regard, we've been able to stay stable and keep projects moving at an efficient rate. And then the other piece I would add as it relates to the community, and this is decades in the making as well, is that, Sisters is not necessarily a one-trick pony. People look at the community from outside and see tourism and think that that's all there is there, but there's actually a really strong light industrial sector in Sisters. And we've had a lot of large employers over the decades and some new ones, including Laird Superfood, make significant investments in the community and really diversify the workforce. And so, we've had Damon Runberg, the regional economist, come and speak to the council numerous times. And, we were very fortunate that we didn't drop as hard and as fast as some other places when the pandemic hit, and also were able to sustain and recover to some extent through that. So definitely still challenges, definitely still emerging from that, but overall in a very strong, stable, and forward-looking place.
Excellent. So Keith, I'm going to go to you next, and then Steve, I'll have you finish us up on this one. So looking at the city of Redmond, you obviously, your city has been engaged in investing some of the funds from the COVID recovery. And so the opportunity for the city of Redmond to possibly leverage some of those funds into a public safety bond measure. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening at the city of Redmond and how you might be able to leverage some of those funds into additional projects.
Sure, I can do that.
Great.
And just I won't give the Redmond version of what we heard from our colleagues, but so we had 29,000 people plus or minus essentially going into COVID, and 36,000 now. So we're seeing the same growth the rest of the cities are seeing in Central Oregon. This is an incredible region. We all know that. And as metro areas have struggled mightily with the number of issues, people are coming to areas that are more pleasant to be in and more space. And so for us, as we look at growth, there's a ton of different issues associated with growth that we're all trying to navigate through with our city councils. For us, one of the most important things we're focused on right now is public safety. And we've got a police department that was built in the late 90s that's about 3 times too small. And we need to build a facility. What am I hearing? Nothing. Okay, we need to build a facility that's going to last for decades. And so what we've got, May 17th, we've got a GO bond for the voters to consider for $40 million. We've got a facility that's estimated at $49 million now. And as you mentioned, City Council has kind of made the commitment to buy down that cost for the taxpayers. So they've invested $9 million, which includes a chunk of the American Recovery resources, as well as some land sales that we've had recently. And so basically, what it means for voters, instead of paying $15 a month for a new police station, it'll be around $12 per month.
Wow. I think it's great for the community to hear how your community is leveraging those federal one-time dollars to be able to have long-term gain. So Steve, I'm going to pivot to you, and I'm going to mix it up here a little bit, because I think this next one's really of importance too. One of the important pieces that I'm sure that everyone here is struggling with, workforce. Anyone not having a workforce concern? So how are you doing? The city of Prineville is doing incredible things. You are a data center mecca. You have been able to create over 450 jobs in a community of just around 10,000 people. And so would love to hear kind of how things are going in Prineville, but also how is the workforce crunch impacting Prineville, if it is, and what sort of incentives or creative ideas are you coming up with to address that issue?
Well, not unlike my buddies here, Prineville's weathered the storm these last couple of years well. The data centers are a big part of that. And we don't want to get caught in the same trap we did with forest products, which is my old industry, where we put all our eggs in one basket. So what we've been trying to do is get ahead of it in terms of workforce training and try to open that up. And what we actually did a couple years ago, right before the pandemic, is we reached out to both the school district and Baker Technical Institute. And they're a trade school, technical school that for hands-on type stuff, electricians, CDLs, CPR training, heavy equipment certification, forklift certification. And we really married that up with our school district. And how we did that is we bring the community together, the different districts together, and we talk about what our needs are. And what came out of that is we were able to leverage the data center community to invest in our relates to the data center industry, whether that's server tech or other fiber type work that's technical in nature. And on the other side of that coin, then we have those trades, so if you want to be an electrician or a plumber or metal worker, bricklayer, and we've combined those two things. And that's our goal, is to try to get that introduced to even the junior high level. And what I can tell you is 2 weeks ago, there were 6 BTI trainers in Prineville. Some of that was forklift training, CDL type stuff, and it's making an impact. We are still struggling with workforce for sure. But one of the things I want to mention to this group is keep in mind that at any given time over the last 12 years, there's been no less than about 1,000 construction workers on site in Prineville doing the data center construction. That continues, and we expect it to continue with what we know the data centers have in mind in terms of their growth, their footprint, and what they have to look forward to. So I think it's really important. The other thing in that aspect is this is not just Prineville people, and certainly we want to get all the Prineville people we can engaged in that process, but we have people and companies from Bend and Redmond and Madras, and it's amazing to me if I leave early in the morning to go to Redmond, how much traffic's coming my way and going towards Redmond. Same with Bend and same with Madras, from, where's Gus? There he is. We have people going back and forth for all our communities. And one of the things that occurs to me is how close all our communities are becoming together and how tight Central Oregon as a region is becoming. We're all in this together, folks. And I think, in the case of the data centers and what's going on in Prineville, that's benefiting a lot of people throughout Central Oregon. So that's what we're doing.
I love it. And you have a hard hat and hand program that's also an apprenticeship for working with the construction industry.
We do.
Working with Facebook. And so really cool things that are happening. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. So anyone else want to, concerns about service delivery or workforce initiatives that you want to note? If not, I'll go on to the next question. Okay. All right. So you noted, at least a couple of you, tourism and the continued growth. And that certainly equates to an impact on our local infrastructure. Late last year, the president signed into law the largest infrastructure package in history. I'm sure that for some folks here, transit is certainly of interest. And so COIC is the largest transit provider here in the region. So we hope to expand services, look at diversifying some of our service options that we have. But in terms of this fine group here, I wanted to start with Eric. We noted that you are the manager of the 6th largest city in Oregon. What will this historic funding mean to the city of Bend? Does this investment provide an opportunity to leverage the voter-approved transportation bond as well?
I was just reflecting, I think the last time we were in person, Tammy, you and I were at City Club talking about the transportation bond in February 2020.
So anytime they want to come back, either have a pandemic happen or have recovery from one.
There was a picture of you and I trying to drive a bus. It was fun. And the success story, it was the voter-approved bond. It actually really positioned us well. We're still applying for some of the federal funds. So the money, the 1-point-something trillion is flowing through the state. And one of our signature projects in the bond was Midtown Crossing, a bike pedestrian crossing that will connect kind of East and West Bend. And so that bond, having money set aside in the bond, helped us leverage some ARPA dollars, some state funds. We also are in the process of trying to acquire some of those infrastructure dollars. And it's not just that Midtown Crossing project. There's projects all up and down the Parkway. There's a really cool corridor approach that's gonna connect our communities, Sisters, Tumalo, and Bend. You're gonna see a major transformation along the north end of Bend. Of course, money that we lobbied in DC for a couple of years to get that north highway, that alignment, getting the congestion around Cooley and Roble all fixed. So all that work is starting in the next year or so, both on the state system and then that $190 million transportation bond projects like Wilson Avenue. That's a huge east-west connective tissue. That project has begun, really exciting. Some key connections also being made at Purcell near the hospital to have more of a grid system in Bend. So we're really excited about finally kind of investing in key infrastructure along with our growth. So a big thanks to the community of Bend that helped support that.
Excellent. So you mentioned the City of Sisters. So Corey, I'm going to turn to you. For a smaller community, this type of additional infusion of funds can make a really big impact. And although that we know that the money has not all been divvied up by the state, do you have any insights into what the Sisters community might be able to anticipate in ways in which you might be able to improve, whether that's transportation in and out of Sisters or just improvements in the Sisters area in general?
Yeah, so a couple things. We all have a great camaraderie up here, so it's not a competition. But Lapine and Sisters were two of the top 10 fastest growing cities in the 2010 to 2020 census, and that trend is continuing. So we're all growing very rapidly, as you all know, in the region, and that does put a lot of stress and pressure, obviously, on our highway systems. And as a city of 3,300 people and having Highway 20, which is one of the main gateways into Central Oregon, run right through downtown, that's been a significant pressure point. And we've heard from folks who've been in Sisters for a long time and newcomers that growth and traffic safety is actually their number one concern. And so the city, for quite some time, has been trying to work to address that. It's a double-edged sword. We like having that traffic come through town. We like having visitors. We like having shoppers. We like all of that. But how do we make sure that downtown is safe and walkable? And how do we not bypass the city, but provide an alternate route for through travelers to move more freely and swiftly and freight to get through Sisters, going from point A to point B. So those of you who have driven through Sisters for quite some time would have noticed that in 2018, a roundabout was built at the Barkley US 20 intersection. And that took almost a decade of working with the freight industry and the state to get that approved and constructed. And right when that was getting built is when I started there and working with the public works director, Paul Bertagna, who's been there for 20 years. We said, hey, we need to prioritize the roundabout at the other end of town at Locust in US 20 to provide for a complete alternate route, the bookend, so to speak. And so what we did is we said, hey, let's invest some of our own money, even though this is a state highway system and a federal highway, to put ourselves in a position that if somehow, some way funds materialize, we could capitalize on that. And we were being told by ODOT at that time that they didn't see any funding until after 2027. And so we said, hey, if that's a 10-year project, we want to at least try to cut that in half. So we've gone through the design, we've gone through right-of-way acquisition, working with the school district, putting ourselves in a good position there. And getting to your question, we're working closely with ODOT and the state to hopefully leverage some of these infrastructure funds to actually get that project built. But as you all know, infrastructure has been significantly underinvested for decades, and a lot of these federal funds are going to bigger metro areas. The Rose Quarter project is going to use, I don't even know how much, $500 million, $1 billion, whatever it is. So even though we only need $5.5 million, and you would think that might be easy, it still isn't a large enough infusion to make all the investments that are necessary.
Right. And I think it's an important piece to the puzzle of, as we think about freight mobility and we think about working as a region, what 5 million can do. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. So part of infrastructure as well is our airports. And so I want to turn to you, Keith. And Redmond, of course, has our region's largest airport and our greatest economic asset. And so I've heard about some expansion plans. Would you mind filling us in on what's happening at the Redmond Airport?
What have you heard? Yeah, so we've got.
I'll tell you later.
Okay. No, and the airport, right at the dip in COVID was down 30, 40, 50%, sometimes worse, depending upon the week. And now it's back up to more than 100% of what it was. So we've got, I'm going to do this fast. So I'll speak to the airport, but I want to speak to a couple other things. We've got 4 or 5 key projects the council's identified to try and access the infrastructure resources. So we want to double the size of the terminal at the airport. That's going to be $200 million plus. We want to try and get that done by 25, 26, just with the growth. Right before COVID, we had 1 million people coming and going each year. We also want to get 70 million for a wetlands complex, the expansion of our wastewater treatment plant.
Where did you
Model-
get that idea?
Some town east of here that's, what do they call, I don't know. They have horses. So, yeah, so it's modeling after the award-winning project in Prineville, which is incredible, using a lagoon system. We've got a transportation projects as well that we're going after money, and it's all tied to freight mobility for US 97 and Highway 126, and then some other smaller infrastructure projects as well. But going back to the airport real fast, if you haven't been there in a while, we've got flights now to like Reno. We've got this airline, Avelo, came in, and they've actually got this pretty interesting model where they just fly in and out of airports where it's much easier than, say, Portland or Houston or something. So you can go from Redmond to Hollywood Airport, and just smaller airports where getting in and out is actually a pleasure rather than something that's going to test your immune system. So a number of things.
Excellent. And speaking of the community of Prineville, so would you like to talk about your airports or your airport?
Sure, thank you. I think this is another great example of how all our communities are growing closer and closer together. So with what City of Redmond and Keith and his team have going on from a commercial standpoint, and obviously Eric to my left here at the Bend Airport with all the aviation related businesses that serve that airport and the traffic that they have. What we found over in Prineville, and not to forget about you, Gus, you got some interesting things going on at your airport, but over in Prineville, what we see happening is Prineville is becoming the general aviation airport for Central Oregon. So a lot of folks from the Bend market that have a small privately held or privately owned aircraft, a 180 or a 210 or a little 150 or something like that, they're coming to Prineville. And so right now we're completely full. We have new hangars being built. And more importantly, what's going on in Prineville is we're starting to see those aviation support companies set up shop in Prineville. And so for example, we have a company that's very close to purchasing the old Les Schwab hangars that the city and the county purchased from Les Schwab Tire Company about 10 years ago. And those are going to get transitioned into job creating businesses, mom and pop aviation related businesses. So I think, as this growth continues, it raises all ships, and certainly it's driving some changes at our little airport in Prineville.
Excellent. So I'm going to pivot now to housing. It goes into much of what you were mentioning in terms of growth, in terms of workforce. Housing has long been an issue for our region, whether that's rental availability and affordability, along with availability of entry-level and middle market housing for homeownership. Many of you have implemented new housing policy changes or incentives. And so, Jeff, I'm going to start with you. I've heard you on a number of occasions in a number of meetings say Lapine is booming. And so permit activity, what are you seeing in Lapine, and what do you see on the horizon?
So when we consider the definition of permit activity, I think it needs to be bifurcated a little bit. In the actual number of permits, in say the last 12 months, we've seen around 60, 65, but that doesn't reflect 60 or 65 individual units. We're talking subdivisions with 50 units here, subdivisions with 40 units there. In the last year, we've had more than 100 new units come online. I would say in the next 12 months, so long as the construction sector can keep up, we're going to be looking at another 100 to 150. In addition to that, we have the enviable position of containing within our city limits what's called the Newberry Overlay Neighborhood, which still contains about 350 acres of undeveloped residential neighborhood in city limits that is accessible to current water and wastewater systems. The caveat to that as well is that the county owns almost all of it. There's a few parcels that are bought up. And so there are incentives that both the city and the county are using to try to attract developers to come in and build different types of housing, because the model so far has been mostly single family. And that works to an extent, but it's completely market driven. And some of the challenges we're seeing at this point is the entry-level home in Lapine, currently a 2-bedroom, 1,300 square foot house, brand new, is about $400,000.
Wow.
And that's
$400,000.
$400,000, yes. Okay. And that's wonderful for our tax base, and that's wonderful for our water and wastewater revenues, but it's not necessarily creating opportunity that we need. Sort of attached to that, while it's not directly related to housing, we're trying to marry these two circumstances in that we have 150 acres of industrial land that is undeveloped. but has roads and is stubbed out for utilities at this point, which is also owned by the county. And so we can build in incentives in that. And it's sort of what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, do we build the housing first to attract the companies, or do we get the companies to come in first and hope the housing pops up? So it's not a terrible problem to have, but we're trying to marry those two pieces together in addition to building more support services such as childcare in the community. And we're proud to announce, albeit small and probably not on a lot of people's radars, but it looks like we're going to get a Mountain Star in our community here by September to start a child relief nursery. And that's the first big step with childcare that will help support these other elements. But to the basis of your question, yes, the housing race is off, the land rush is off in La Pine. Everybody knows about it now. And with my one city planner and myself and our one contract planner, we're managing it as best we can.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
With a great tip of
city
the hat
planner.
to the county and the community development
Well,
department.
it sounds like
so.
a fun game of let's make a deal. Okay, so thank you, Jeff. Gus, I'm going to turn to you. I noted in your budget goals the city of Madras has a housing action plan. And so tell us how that is going and how that's addressing the issue for your community in Madras.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. About 2016, 2017, our council had its annual work session and really said, gosh, we got to get housing going. There's a lot of activity in the region. Don't have a lot of builders in our community. We need to do something. We studied, surveyed the builders, studied and identified that a housing district would make sense for us. And so we implemented it. It works like a commercial urban renewal district, but for housing. We got about 700 acres in it. And we got a couple large builders to come in that offer a suite of options, and they're going gangbusters. So before our housing district, you know, a good year was 20-30 housing units. We did 148 last year.
Wow.
And 2 years ago, the first year of the district, I think we were at 58. And those two largest builders are still pushing. So we've got the first multifamily apartments that are basically open market rate, no income restrictions, opening this spring. We haven't had one of those since 2005. Their next product that they want to go to is townhomes, and then they're looking at some cottage clusters. So what that does for us is, instead of that $300,000 to $400,000 traditional single-family home, now we have a townhome option, we have a cottage cluster or an apartment option, rents and purchase options in there. So I think those suite of options are going to hit those income ranges a little bit, where that single-family home, inflation's driving it, and you got to have the income or double incomes. And so I'm just glad those builders are listening and hearing the market going, we need some options. So I'm happy to report that. So that's where the push is right now. And we're just, the city continues to, council supports infrastructure, whether it be sewer extensions or going after transportation opportunities to support that. That's actively being pushed and going on.
Thank you for that. And I think what you're hearing is, you know, taking the pressure off from Bend, these other communities, which we all are connected together, having that housing development be built up in the other communities really is going to be able to benefit us as a region as a whole. So Eric, the housing affordability crisis is certainly a barrier in the Bend community, especially in attracting a strong workforce. And so much so that the Bend Chamber has stepped in to assist with the Workforce Housing Initiative too, which is really incredible. Your council priorities show a goal of adding 1,000 units of rent and price restricted housing. An article just last week stated that Bend currently has 877 multifamily units under construction, and another 110 were completed last July, between last July and now, which is fantastic. I mean, that's usually we set those goals, but it's hard to attain them. What incentives, policies, or programs is the city working on, and how do you see that impacting this issue in the short and the long term in Bend?
Yeah, housing has been at the forefront for many years. So we've done a lot to kind of build a foundation, starting back in 2006 with an affordable housing program, local funding that can be matched to get units on the ground. We've been doing about 100 units of deed restricted affordable housing per year. We've ramped that up, and as you mentioned, about 1,000 units in the pipeline over 2 years. So huge increase. We've also just increased our land availability, dollars for infrastructure to enable projects, reduced or exempted SDCs for affordable housing. We've changed our policies. We were the first city in the state to implement what's called House Bill 2001, which is really allowing that middle housing. Think of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in our neighborhoods. So we are pulling out every trick that we can to be able to just increase supply. So we had a goal we do biennial goals that connect with our budget. We had a goal of 3,000 housing units. We surpassed that. We're almost at 4,000. So we're going to keep pushing, keep setting goals, keep pushing. But it's the demand. People want to be here faster than we can build, and it is not something that is going to be a hole that we can just dig ourselves out of in a year or two. This is going to be a decade-long push of increasing housing supply, looking at doing things differently, looking at different housing models. I'm glad to see Cory is here, looking at land lease models, looking at more creative public-private partnerships and exploring that middle income housing. I think is going to be our next focus of trying to incentivize that, often called workforce or middle income housing in many different forms.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So Steve, you noted in a recent meeting that Prineville, which used to be considered much more affordable than Bend and Redmond, is now building for $500,000 homes. Do you want to touch on that really quickly about what you're seeing in your community?
Yeah, I mean, we have the same issues that Eric was talking about in terms of availability and affordability, especially with the data center phenomenon hitting our community as it has. So one of the things that we've tried to do is be super competitive on our SDCs, and our wetland project, Keith, was a big part of that. And we've drove those down. We've given developers some options, and we've really leveraged our relationship with our private partner relationships, especially with the data centers. And what I mean by that is they've come in and wanted certain infrastructure as it relates to city services, whether that's streets or water or wastewater. And we've leveraged those opportunities to basically build capacity. And so we've set our community up for some growth that negates some of those costs that otherwise we would have to bear ourselves. And we've put some of that burden on our partnerships with the private sector. So that's been helpful. But at the same time, what we've seen is in the past, the differential in housing price between Bend and to a lesser degree Redmond and Prineville was substantial. So a lot of the developers and builders were more profitable in those other two communities. And we've really seen a shift in that. And so, for example, the average price of new homes in Prineville right now is getting very close to $500,000. And 3 years ago, it was probably 300 and something. So that gap is really closing. And what's resulted in that is a lot of new homes are being built in Prineville, a lot of developers. So we've had a couple hundred homes, single family homes in the last 18 months. But what's interesting about that is we've also had an influx of apartment type complexes to the tune of about 400 units. So for our little community, that's a lot. At the same time, the city council made some very strategic moves in terms of factoring in that affordability issue. And right now we have 44 low-income apartments under construction. We completed over 50. One of them was the old Ochiko grade school conversion. I don't know if you've seen that when you come down the hill in Prineville. That's been very successful. And then we have another one up in the Iron Horse area, the old Hudspeth property. Part of the things that we've tried to do at the city strategically is factor in quality of life and open space that ties all this together. And we were able to pick up from Brooks Resources that whole Barnes Butte area is now under city control and ownership. And how we did that was water rights, because we need water, and traffic, because we need to connect the north part of Prineville to the south part. So that's how we were able to leverage some of those franchise fee dollars that come our way because of the data centers, and we're able to put those programs together to set us up for the future. But again, I think the bottom line is, the theme that I keep harping on today as I'm up here is our communities are just, they're becoming more alike. And it isn't going to matter, in my opinion, whether you're in Redmond or Madras. Pricing is going to be up there. So we need to find ways. Our city council and our staff need to find ways to make sure that we have that breadth of affordability from A to Z when we can.
Thank you, Steve. Speaking of opportunity, last year we had a conversation. Keith, Redmond was successful in getting the House Bill 2336, which was championed by Representative Zika, which opens the door for affordable housing projects in the Redmond community. And it was estimated at 485 homes, a 50-50 mix of affordability, market rate. How's that project going, and what's happening in the city of Redmond?
So yeah, with that project, thanks to Representative Zika and then the partnership with the county, they give us 40 acres on the east side of Redmond that we're going to build a new neighborhood. And as Tammy was talking about, it'll be 485 units, at least half will be affordable at 80% below AMI. Basically, that means a family of four making about 70,000 could be able to afford it. And we're putting in the infrastructure right now. We're also getting more money to put in the infrastructure. But I guess for you folks, we're going to hire a master developer to oversee the completion of the vision. So that's going to happen over the next few months. We've got a list of 20 developers right now that are interested, everyone from Hayden to Housing Works. And the idea is to really push the limits on the kind of units, the size of units. It's a situation where we all know one of the biggest variables in Central Oregon in cost is land, right? An acre of land can cost 100,000 or 200 or more. And with the county's help, by having them throw in the land, we're going to be able to offer these homes for less, which means we should do our part to try and create housing that may not be bankable to a normal financial institution right now because it's different. We can take those risks. I came, it seems like a lifetime ago, from Portland, where I remember when we worked on some of the first projects in inner Southeast where you combined a grocery store with housing, that we had to overspend on the subsidy to make it happen. But once you prove the model can work, it opens up the financial markets for the future. And so we're going to try and do those kinds of things with this development. And we hope that people can start moving in within the next few years, because as you're hearing, right, everybody needs housing. It's a huge mountain to climb, and we at least need to kind of get halfway up it.
Excellent, thank you. So Corey, the City of Sisters completed an update of the comprehensive plan last year, which for a community of the size of Sisters, it's a big undertaking. I believe you may be working on a housing plan update as well. How will these updates assist with accommodating growth and creating affordable housing in Sisters country?
Yeah, a few things. So it was interesting coming from Lapine to Sisters because, you know, the two small cities in Deschutes County are really in totally different situations as it comes to vacant land, and especially publicly owned vacant land. So there is no city-owned or county-owned vacant land in the City of Sisters that we could leverage through a partnership to develop. And that's really one of the biggest issues that we have been stuck between a rock and a hard place to some extent. Is, you know, we've seen a lot of infill during the expansion post Great Recession, and that's great, but we're running low on our buildable lands inventory. And so one of the first things you need to do is you need to update your comprehensive plan. You need to have that 20-year growth outlook, and you need to work within the state land use system to also understand, do you have 20 years of buildable land? And it's always part art, part science. It's always a moving target. So you have to just embrace that a little bit. But the other factor in Sisters is that growth, like I said earlier, is the biggest concern from people. And, you know, they want all the amenities and the things that they moved from where they moved from, which including a lot of folks from Bend and other places in Central Oregon are now moving to Sisters. But they also don't want to see the growth. And so the biggest thing is we are going to grow, but how do we manage that growth? And that was the effort with the comprehensive plan, was at a 10,000 foot level. How are we looking across all components of the city, not just housing, but housing in particular, to accommodate that growth? And so this year, on the heels of the comp plan, we're doing a housing plan update, and we're also doing an efficiency measures exercise, which we're under 10,000 population, and all cities under 10,000 are exempt from House Bill 2001. But there's still a lot of good policies in 2001 that we need to look at. We need to become denser to some extent. How far? That's what we need to figure out, because we're either going to grow out or we're going to grow up. We have to do a little bit of both, probably. So we're trying to, through a very community-oriented process, figure that out this year. And then eventually in the coming years, we're going to be having a UGB conversation, UGB expansion, urban growth boundary expansion, to bring more buildable land into the city. And again, for a small city that hasn't done that for 15 years, that's a big deal. So we have to walk through those conversations thoughtfully, while also understanding that we are in a housing crisis, and affordability in Sisters is kind of an oxymoron at this point. So.
And your median home price is around 600,000, is that correct?
I think it's even over 7 now.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Okay.
it's extreme. Yeah. And then even beyond that, as everyone knows, the supply is so low,
Sure.
and then cash buyers coming in and all those constraints.
Got it. Puts it into perspective, doesn't it? And it leads into the next question, because without affordable housing to match the needs of our region, it's no secret that we are experiencing an increase in community members who are at risk of becoming homeless, as well as an increase in those that are actually without housing. So some of the questions that I've heard, what really is the role of the city in seeking a solution? What is the current situation in your city? And how is your city addressing this issue? And Gus, I'm going to turn to you first, because on the front page of the bulletin today, there was some really great news. And that is that the city of Madras is receiving $1.5 million for a homeless shelter. Please tell us more about how this fits into your plan to address this need in your community.
All right, thanks, Tammy. We've been fortunate with a combination of community development block grant dollars, the 1.5, and then Senator Finley was gracious enough to move some ARPA that was eligible for helping homeless and the disadvantaged of another 750. So we have and then we match some of our ARPA. So we have about a $2.5 million effort to acquire land, designs in progress. The Jefferson County Faith-Based Network is going to operate it. They've been operating the winter shelter the last several seasons, but they've been getting kicked around to interim locations that can't be counted on every season. So this will give them a place to be able to stay, and then year-round services. Not always people planning to stay in there, but still meeting and appointments with partners will be Mosaic Medical, Best Care, and other coalition members to try to help folks get to a better place. And sometimes it may just be helping folks with mental health issues. And so it's going to give us a place year-round to help with those services. And so that's moving forward. Part of the community's concern, we're adding to the problem. Other parts of the community are glad we're doing something about the problem and not doing anything at all. We're trying to be a facilitator. We're not the provider of services, but we're trying to be the mechanism to enhance services. And we believe we can make it better than leaving it alone. So the councils believe that. And now we got to walk that. Our partner in the community, the Faith-Based Network, is literally helping our public works department with just garbage services, how we work together and volunteering and keeping it reasonably clean. Our police force works very closely on, hey, where you not supposed to be trespassing, where it's okay interim. But there's still a lot of mixed opinion on where they can be allowed. And then do we just shoo them around year round? And how much public safety force do we dedicate to that when we're already lean? So it's challenging. I really feel like it's super complicated. There's not a silver bullet to it. We're being asked as a community to care, and some people have different ideas how we do that. So there's a lot of laws are protected, and we just can't haul them to another community and drop them off. So all that said is we're in a pickle, and it's going to be a community problem to work on. So that's where we are. I can't candy coat it, but I'm very thankful for the dollars that have come our way. There's no way we'd pull this off with our own resources without those aids. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate your candor, because you operationalize your council's goals, and your councils are reflective of your communities, and you are going to get a mixed variety of opinions about how we find solutions. And so next I'm going to go to Keith and Eric, who are, of course, part of the larger communities who have the lion's share of the resources. And so, Eric, I'm going to also tee you up for an opportunity to talk about the collaborative office, because I think it's been great to have Representative Croft to champion that for Bend and Deschutes County and the other communities. But both of your communities were awarded turnkey projects. And so how do these investments impact the increasing numbers in your communities? And most importantly, what are your communities doing? And for Bend, it's what are you not doing to try to address this issue? I'm not sure if you want to fight over who starts it. Maybe you want to. Okay, Keith, please. So Project Turnkey, yes.
But let me first, I want to do a tangent on the homelessness stuff. I read this book during COVID, where that's all I did during COVID was read. It was called Braiding Sweetgrass, and in one of each chapter was very rich. And one of them had talked about the relationship to the land and animals, and how if you're walking down a trail and you see like a hoof print, a lot of times people are like, what is it? Right? Versus, hey, someone was here, and actually humanizing what's out in the wilderness as a them versus an it. And I think when you look at houselessness, and not too many people, maybe Tammy aspires to live in her car someday. And I think that like how we can make these investments to try and help the folks that are not there intentionally and are trying to, maybe they missed a paycheck, maybe, life just didn't turn out the way they would want it, we would all want it. And how do you make investments to help them come in from when they're at and get them back into the role they probably want to play in society. And we've been fortunate in Redmond to have incredible partners in Gwen, who is here with Bethlehem Inn, who bought a beaten down old motel in Redmond through Project Turnkey and has turned it into a high barrier shelter. We've got another great partner in Shepherd's House, which is going to be opening up a low barrier shelter in 2023. We've got, and the county has been an incredible player in both of those, investing their ARPA dollars. And we've also got the county at the table as we look at this project that is called Oasis Village, where we're trying to use a couple acres of county-owned land near the airport to be able to model projects that are being built down in the Rogue Valley right now, where again, it gives the folks that are, and it might be 30, 40%. I mean, there are folks that prefer to live outside. Again, not to go backwards in time, but I oversaw homelessness in Portland for the mayor when I was working there in the 90s. And there's some people that they want to just live outside and kind of be disconnected. But for the ones that are trying to reestablish themselves, it takes the county, it takes cities, and it takes these partners we just mentioned to be able to make it happen for people. And so what we're doing is working with those partners, working with some of the faith community churches to provide. They're also providing through a program called Safe Parking, where they offer 2-3 spaces on their property in a managed way to, again, help people kind of get their feet under them. And then with the joint office and through the work of Representative Croft, being able to get $2 million in operating. And we're all, well, everyone in Deschutes County is going to be a partner in that in terms of the cities, where there'll be this joint office located at the county physically, and then that way we can work together to figure out the solutions. Because unlike other things, like we could say, hey, I need 200 million for an airport terminal. I know if we get 200 million, we can build an airport terminal. We could take millions of dollars, invest in houselessness, and it's not quite as easy invest A and get B. And that's why when we see, I'll stop soon. That's why when we see in these other larger cities, it's really, not their fault entirely that the problem has gone beyond their control, because a lot of these cities have invested millions, but it's so complicated and complex, particularly when you mix in behavioral health and mental health and other things that humans at times tend to get stuck in and need help getting out of. Did I answer the question?
You did, and I
Okay.
appreciate you pointing out, because there isn't a whole lot that separates me from being in the same position as someone else. And so I think that is a reality. And we do know through research of identifying the individuals in our community that over 74% of the individuals who are currently unhoused identify as having been in the Central Oregon community in the last 3 years. And so we're not talking about individuals, the lion's share, coming because we have resources. We're talking about individuals that are within our communities already. So Eric, I'll go ahead and tee you up.
No, I mean, this is we need a whole topic and
Yeah.
to do it justice, or a whole session to do it justice. I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis, and then there's so many system failures that have created this situation, and it's not going to be, there's no easy button. There's no, let's just, add more shelters. It's much deeper than that. There's so many support systems that aren't there. And we need to look at this through the lens of, we have a significant part of our population that's been left behind. And it is going to take all of us to figure this out. This is not a city issue. It's not a county issue. It's a community issue. So we all own pieces of it. So we have our strategy at the city, very similar to what Keith mentioned. So we're trying to expand capacity, just getting folks housed. So we have a specific goal around having 500 shelter beds. We started with about 120 when we did our biennial goals, and we're up to about 280. We'll be close to 400 in the next year. So we'll be close to meeting that goal, but we're going to need our nonprofit community to really help us achieve the rest. So we're doing things like just setting the table from a zoning sort of code perspective, making it easier to site temporary housing. That's in process. We've, through Representative Krupp's help, we've been able to secure the Second Street shelter, kind of a year-round warming shelter. We also, through Project Turnkey, acquired a site similar to Redmond, and then also purchasing another hotel through the American Rescue Plan Act, so leveraging those federal dollars. And there's more to be done. And I think we only have certain tools at the city in terms of housing dollars and getting some things funded, but we need help with the county. And that's where that collaborative office has come in, where it really forces a shared governance structure where we're all going to be sitting at the table making decisions about how to fund, how to sustain, whose role is what. And this is not unique to this region. This is happening all across the state. We have the problem though is amplified. 70% of our population is unsheltered that is experiencing homelessness, which I would say most, even in Portland, the unsheltered population is 50%. So we've got a challenge ahead of us, and it's going to take many different strategies. Also on the enforcement side too, and managing our rights of way and public lands, having fire risk and public health and safety issues in our communities is not a solution. So it needs to be addressed full circle. So I wish I could, there's so much I could say.
It's a tough one, and I
it's a
do,
tough
you know,
one.
there is, please, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about something real quick that happened in Prineville about 18 months ago that relates to this. And we've heard the gentleman here talk about, folks that have mental health issues or addiction issues. And one of the things we observed, and I think it's true across the state, across the nation, is, that first point of contact typically in a lot of those cases is our public safety officers, the men and women in the blue. And one of the things we did actually with some of our funding, and we added to it with the ARPA funding, was we ended up doing an experiment with one of our officers who has a real passion for helping people that are in need. And we partnered with some of our service providers that were providing homeless type services and counseling to those in need. And we married that up. So we had a clinician or a person with expertise in coaching and counseling in with our public safety officer in the patrol car. And it was remarkable how many people got back on track, whether that was participating in a homeless opportunity and then building upon that with getting a job or getting some extra counseling, staying on their medications. And again, remarkable results. So the reason I bring that up is I think what Eric's saying is really true. That maybe is one way that we can actually maybe shift how public safety responsibilities are allocated, in terms of that being a component and a tool in the toolbox that helps facilitate some of these homelessness issues and trying to get people some help. Interestingly enough, this particular officer who has endeared himself to our community got recruited by this guy here. And anyway, so I think I just bring that up because there is some things going on and some ideas being kicked around in our communities that I think will have an impact on trying to drill down to that root cause in those certain cases.
Thank you for that bright light. I think that crisis intervention piece really has shown that it's definitely meeting people where they are and offering that support. And it is open season for attracting and employment from other cities. I believe that City of Sisters just picked up 3 Redmond employees. And so I think that's, it's fair game. So on another note, in terms of, we've talked about the humanitarian crisis, and the last of the formalized questions. Also on the front page of the bulletin today is the early declaration of a drought emergency for Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson counties. And as we all know, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And so, but you can see here today that there isn't much fight. There's a whole lot of alignment. And so Gus and Steve in particular, I want to turn this to you. So Gus, what does that mean for the community of Madras? Your agricultural economy is significant, not only to our region, but the state of Oregon. And then I'm going to turn it to you, Steve, in terms of similar question.
Well, thanks, Tammy. And I wish Mike Britton, our North Unit Irrigation District Manager, could present this to you because he's been on the forefront for many years now. And I can tell you, as Steve is saying, we're very connected on issues, and water's probably at the top of that issue as we go further into drought conditions. My wife and I moved here in 2005. We have a little farm on the west side of Madras, and we have always gotten about 2 feet of water each year until the last couple of years. And then I think we went to 1.5 acre feet. And then we started at 1 this last summer, and we got to about the 3rd week of June and said, no, that's 0.9. 2 weeks later, they said, no, it's 0.8. No, by the way, we're rationing you immediately, effective immediately. Went to a town hall meeting, and I thought that Josh is the new North Unit manager. I thought he was going to get killed. Those farmers knew we were in a drought, but what happened is the water change shifted and conditions were so much worse than estimated that literally farmers had put 200 or 300 acres of fertilizer out 1 week earlier and got a 2-week notice, got a 1-day notice that they're going to rationing. What that meant is they lost that crop, and that can be $100 an acre of fertilizer. I've seen some people just ill going, if I'd known 2 weeks earlier that we're going to be 0.8, I'd made some different financial decisions. It moved that fast last year. So I imagine this year, I haven't heard yet, but I imagine we'll be somewhere around 0.5, 0.6 acres of a 2 acre feed allotment. So what that means for Jefferson County is probably some farmers they'll lose their farms. We just go down, we might be in production a third. Yes, crops will have to change. There's a lot of ground that just won't be irrigated. And what's crummy is, we're about 15, 16 years into a 30-year mortgage on that place. And it's different than what we thought we had. And so it's very hard to turn in just a few years and make a change. For those folks that's their full-time living, it's sad. I can only imagine bankruptcy is on the verge. So I'm glad I'm working for the city and have something stable. For the
Well,
other
let's define
farmers, I just
stable.
pray for them and say, I feel I'm with you, brother and sister, and we're at the mercy of above. And what we need from the Central Oregon region is cooperation to work together on alternatives to store water in different locations, to be sensitive to the needs of the river, and how can we adjust with these changes that have really, it's a compounding issue of trying to adjust stream flows, drought on top of it, and they all came at once. And then there's a step-up provision over 20 years to really take Wickiup Reservoir to where it can't store anymore for the Jefferson County area. So those are big issues. Some of those collaboration areas we'll be working with our state and federal legislators, Oregon Water Resources Department, Central Oregon Irrigation Districts, cooperation, Prineville's Ocho Irrigation District, all the districts, anywhere we can save water, to share water and cooperate will be critical for the survival of the Jefferson County farming community. So those things are all out there, and we thank the Central Oregon community for what has been done so far. It's just really like, how do we navigate the next 20 years and start to outlay a plan? Because we got to think farther than 3-4 year terms. We got to think longer and work our way that direction. We'll need the cooperation of the recreation and fishing communities on these systems as we look at Lake Billy Chinook as a better storage location, all those things. So it's highly sensitive and highly demanding, and the farmers are feeling it now. Their stress is heavy.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
tried to
Well, I
shape that
appreciate-
up from a very complicated
Hey,
area.
Gus, so to bring it home though, right? Unless you want your food provided by Monsanto, right? We need these small farmers and the small farms to be able to provide, the breadth of sources that we need, as a country, right?
And I appreciate the personal perspective too, because I think it's easy to read something and say, oh, darn, we're in a drought again, but not really understanding what does that mean. It means a lot to our economy, and it means a lot to our individual community members. So Steve, in terms of Ochco and, junior water rights also for North Unit, so that's a big issue. What's happening in North Unit, or for Ochco and in the community of Prineville?
Well, I'm kind of like Gus. I've been a commercial hay farmer for about 23 years. And so, again, I can't speak for Gus, but I'm a city manager to support my farming habit. This is kind of the way it's been working. So anyway, the Crooked River is part of the Deschutes Basin. And in the case of North Unit, there's a 10,000 acre foot allocation out of Prineville Reservoir that makes its way to pumps down by Smith Rocks that ultimately go to North Unit. So again, we're connected at the hip, so to speak. What's striking in this particular year is right now today, there's half the water stored in Prineville Reservoir than there was a year ago. So as bad as it was last year, which we were on a run rate as opposed to an allocation of 70 hundredths CFS per acre. It is twice as bad as it was last year. So we would be longing for how good we had it last year. Given on where we're at today, again, we're only 1 or 2 storms away from success, but we're running out of time. So much in the same fashion where the Crooked River's been a little bit insulated through the years in terms of the allocations we've been able to offer our patrons at the Ochoco Irrigation District. And this year is going to be extremely difficult. And we have records that go back. I serve on the board at OID. We have records that go back clear into 1890s on flows on the Crooked River. We have very accurate records from about 1942 on. There's never, ever been a year like this one is shaping up to be. Last year, we have had a couple times through about every 20, 22 years, something similar. But what we're shaping up to right now is unprecedented. So it is a tough time. It is going to be difficult for us to get through this. And I think going forward, as Gus says, we have to work together as a collaborative. We have a lot of 8 irrigation districts that are working together, Chutes Basin Board of Control. We have some innovative programs in play to conserve water, both in terms of piping and both in terms of on-farm opportunities. And all those, kind of like the homeless problem, we're all going to have, there's no silver bullet, and we're all going to have to work together, and there's going to be a lot of tools applied to get this problem solved and provide some sustainability for the ever important agricultural opportunities that we have here in Central Oregon. I think carrot seeds were, we're the #1 in the nation. A lot of people say, well, we grow a lot of forage. Well, I grow forage, and where my forage goes is to dairies primarily. So, hay is a big deal because that's where a lot of our dairy products are dependent upon. So, it's a big problem, and hopefully, one last thing that I find just fascinating. If you look in terms of 100 years ago, and you look at photos of Central Oregon, particularly as you go east, and you look at the juniper encroachment that's happened in the last 100 years, it's phenomenal. And there's been a lot of studies done, and I'll probably have my numbers a little bit off, but I believe that in today's juniper forest, a typical 1-acre parcel consumes 75,000 gallons a season of water. And if you were to restore our grassland areas that used to not have as many junipers, especially again, moving east into some of these tributaries that make its way to the chutes, if you kind of do the math on that, that's kind of about the water we've been missing. So I think therein lies an opportunity for Central Oregon is, what do we do about that juniper encroachment, and what kind of opportunities can we come up with to commercialize that and find a way to restore that juniper and even in the conifer forest as well. So I think there's opportunity. We got to figure it out.
So I think it's important that we hear from the city of Bend as well, because obviously our largest populated area. And so with the drought declaration, and we do have Mayor Russell here today, encouraged residents of the city of Bend to begin conserving water now rather than waiting for the summer. Are there any other ideas that are being discussed by your council in terms of water conservation that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think we're always looking to improve our conservation efforts and not just go to the city of Bend. We also have private utility providers here in the city and trying to encourage that same type of kind of integrated approach to water, making sure it's being conserved so that we can actually save on infrastructure costs as well. And being really thoughtful about, our role in being part of the basin, right? It's, I think thankfully, we've got folks like Steve here that have been really at the forefront at being on the board of the Deschutes River Conservancy. And there's so many collaborative efforts that COIC is leading to really help us get out of our silos and actually think more regionally about water use. And so we're a part of that. And I think it's just going right down to giving information to the customer. So we've been really aggressive at like your electricity bill, where you get the notification of like how much you're using. We're doing the same thing with water, so that we put more of the control in the hands of the customer so that they're actually managing their use as well as the money coming out of their pocketbook.
Excellent. Thank you. So now the fun part, we have your questions. I have a few in front of me here. And so the first question that I have is, what one common policy issue, if we all focused on it and solved, would be the most impactful for Central Oregon? It's just a light question. So what one common policy issue, if we all focused on it and solved, would be the most impactful for Central Oregon? I could think of maybe some water law policies. I could think of maybe a few land use policies. But all of you, anything you want to throw out there?
I think transportation too, as we
Oh,
all
sure.
talked about
Yes, okay.
the connectedness of our community. I think and thank you to COIC for the connector shuttles, and we've got to think more innovatively about how we're moving people in this region.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, anything else on that one? All right. Okay, so the next one, what role do the cities play in influencing legislative policy? Is this Doug Riggs? Is this a Doug question? I love it. Okay, $20 and I'll finish it. Just kidding. So what role do the cities play in influencing legislative policy through your coalitions? What topics have you mutually worked together on over the years?
This was a total plant from Doug Riggs.
You all want Doug to answer it? I love it. Okay, so please, what policy are you working on together? Probably those and then some.
Well, I mean, I think that what we just talked about, the policy related to a shared governance system around homelessness, that's one. We've worked on policy related to water. So a big shout out to Doug Riggs, who is we have a Central Oregon City Coalition that all of us here participate in, as well as our elected officials, at setting legislative priorities for the region. We've worked on land use issues, the affordable housing pilot projects, both in Bend and Redmond. We've worked on just also having to prevent bad things coming from the state too that would affect us at the local level. So it's a defense and offensive strategy.
Yeah, and just so people know, and this is probably one of the smarter crowds around, but we don't just get together, once a year at City Club to talk about things, right? With Doug and others, we meet every single month, and so to think about legislative strategies, to think about things we have in common that we're trying to solve for. So it's constant, just so people know.
I think that's an important point. Okay, so next question, Keith, I think is to you. What are the prospects of subsidizing coach service to Portland? Should that be considered on par with efforts to expand?
Stagecoach?
Stagecoach, yes, I think it is.
Dog kibble things?
So Steve, saddle up those horses, and if you could get those to Redmond. And so should that be considered on par with efforts to expand the Redmond Airport?
So the issue in terms of the Portland flights has nothing to do with subsidies. It has to do with pilot shortage. Like, we're at the kind of behest of the airlines, and as they shift routes based on planes and based on pilots, right? Getting you probably saw in the paper recently, the Alaska Training School, like a component of it here, is great because it means Alaska is going to, I mean, they've always put effort into training pilots, but they're trying to create the farm system. But our flights are, when we get grants, for example, like there's probably going to be a flight starting to Dallas fairly soon. And with that, you've got to guarantee the carrier revenue for the first chunk of years. And so we get these revenue guarantees to help make sure they make a minimum amount over like a 5-year time period. And at that point, hopefully, it can just continue to go on its own. So that's how flights are basically, that's how we attain those. And it's a whole team of people involved in it. But when they pull flights like Portland and they pulled Chicago right now, that has to do with planes and pilot shortage, not subsidies.
Got it. Thank you. So we will need those horses, Steve. Some people have felt more able to participate in public meetings during the pandemic, while others have felt disenfranchised. How do we balance that moving forward? Did all of you go remote? All of you did. Okay. And are all of you back in person?
Hybrid.
Many of you. Okay. Hybrid. Okay.
Hybrid, yeah.
Keith is choosing not to answer. Why did no one want to sit next to you? I think that should be a question too.
I haven't showered in 2 years. That's why.
I think we should ask that question too. I'm sure it's on here. Why does no one want to sit next to Keith Witcosky? Okay, so anyway, I digress. So how do we continue to have this public involvement? Do you continue to stay offering some opportunities for virtual, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like the workforce. It's a new environment, so we're gonna have both. I don't see that going away.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Smaller communities. What's happening in Pine?
We've been meeting in person now for about 3 months, and we're live casting over Facebook our
Excellent.
meetings. So
Wonderful.
And I think some component, like we're required now to be able to offer
Yes, we
virtual.
are.
So we haven't met in a couple of years. We're going to start meeting again in person April, whatever that Tuesday is, 5th. And so for us, right, you can come in person down to City Hall, or you can link in at the comfort of your own home on your computer.
Excellent.
I think the only interesting thing too, though, is that we didn't even see attendance of the city council meetings or committee meetings go up with that access. So I think that the real root of that question is deeper than just, hey, how are we being reactive in community engagement, and how are we being proactive in being fostering an inclusive environment and getting the community to engage in what we're talking about. That's a whole nother conversation and something that we need to continue to work on. And I think we all have been thinking about that and trying to work on that to some extent as well.
And that brings us back to $665 million of tax revenue right here. So not getting involved certainly is a disservice to helping influence policy. And yes, Keith, please.
Thanks. That's why I'm sitting so close to you.
Okay, I know, so you could tap me.
But no, I mean, I'd be remiss with Erica McAlpin here too as well. I mean, the inclusivity piece that Corey speaks to, it goes beyond just, can I log in from my couch or come down to City Hall? Like for us and cities and city councils, it's how do we move forward and constantly think about ways to get the voices of the communities involved, particularly those that are disenfranchised, those that aren't comfortable coming down and seeing government, and bring them in a meaningful way where their participation makes a difference, and they can be part of solving these problems and identifying things, right? It's 6 white guys here. That's not lost on me. How do we make sure that we're seeing things that we don't see? And so it does take everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Well, that's good. It's not lost on me either. Okay. Women's History Month. With drought impacting the region, how can the state, counties, and cities consider approving resort developments? Oh boy, this is, I should have read it all the way through. Okay, resort developments like Thornburg that will drain the water supply with golf courses and artificial lakes. Now, there may be some reading into that of what the outcome will be. I don't know that this necessarily is a city specific, but I think it goes back to drought. So maybe I'll ask it this way. Do the cities, when you feel like a project is going to be impacting your area, do you weigh in on what those potential impacts might be? Is there a yin and a yang of how you communicate about what maybe a county's doing or the state? Is that a fair statement?
I would say from a small city perspective, we have our documents and our reports and our research that's on the shelf. And every large project that is proposed or is being discussed in sort of a pre-application format, we're looking at the needs of what they're going to require. And actually, this relates very much to what Steve experiences. We're getting a lot of interest right now from data mining organizations because of our industrial park. And some of these groups do plan on using water, and we're looking at the load they're going to need, not only just in terms of water, but also electricity. And some of them are also using alternative methodologies, but we sit down and like I said, we've got those documents on the shelf, and we can tell them very clearly in a pretty short amount of time, you can fit our current model and what we're allowed to use in terms of the gallons per minute that we can let flow on any given day, or you can't. So it's simple for us. I can't speak for my contemporaries in bigger cities, but it's a very black and white question in a small community.
Well, and this particular project's been litigated quite a few times, and so
Yes,
that's why I'm a
very
little bit
familiar.
sensitive. And so, but I do think it raises a great question of, that synergy. We talked about how we're in this together, and so how does a project impact? And so I appreciate you answering it in that way. So the answer is yes, there is a synergy there. The next question is, what is the city's responsibility to help its residents reach employment centers? As stated, we are becoming a strong community of small cities working together. Thoughts on expanded public transit or transport is what it states. But I'll go ahead and speak to transit really quickly. If you have a pulse and a CDL, I'd love to see you after the meeting because we need you driving. We are looking at diversifying our fleet to be able to have the opportunity to have non-CDL drivers drive smaller vehicles. Right now, it's not a funding issue. It is a workforce issue of having the availability of drivers. And so, as the provider of transit in the region, we will be seeing expanded services on the horizon, but there is a close connection with all of our cities. You inform us in terms of what your needs are. We then let you know what that will cost or how we seek that funding. But would anyone else like to maybe make a comment about transit? I know we've had
Monorail.
Yeah, monorail, right.
Simpsons. Anybody seen Simpsons? Remember that
Okay.
episode of Simpsons?
Well, and you know what? We could actually solve the affordable housing conversation if I had a nickel for every time someone said, well, how about that rail out there? How come we just can't get a train to go from, all of our cities together? And I don't know the last time that someone had dinner with someone from BNSF, but they didn't show to my house either. So anyway, but I do think, all joking aside, it's a big deal. And I would just say that we work in close concert with our cities to make sure that we are meeting the needs as best as we can. We will have a deviated service that'll start in Redmond soon. We do the community connectors between our communities. And I would just share with you that the community connector service is actually where most of our ridership is. And so bringing people to and fro from the Bend and Redmond communities is a big deal.
With gas prices what they are now, ridership is going to increase.
Right.
It is. So let's be prepared for it. And
Absolutely.
Put the infrastructure in. And so mobility hubs is another sort of solution set of really looking more creatively at integrating different modes. So it's transit, bike share, ride share, biking and walking, and doing that in a more decentralized fashion.
Yes, microtransit is on the horizon as well. We're going to take a stab at that again. So I think you're going to see transit looking different in each of the communities, but a close conversation there. So the last question I'm going to ask is, because we have about 3 minutes, let me get to where'd my list go? Uh-oh, I was doing so well. But don't ask Keith, he'll probably tell you that's not true. So as we reemerge, what is your thought on the role and the value of working together as a region? And Steve, I'm going to start with you because I think you tie this together really well, and you noted it earlier. I have the opportunity to work with all of you on a quarterly basis. They get together with the county administrators as well, and at LIBA from the governor's office. This is not new for them to get together and talk. But what is unique is that you all get along, the banter, the camaraderie, the partnership. It doesn't look this way across the state of Oregon. And so I just wanted to say, what do you see as the value of this? And, what do you want the communities to know?
Well, I think, and we mentioned a lot of them today, but we have Central Oregon Cities Organization, and we have Doug Riggs sitting back there. Hey, Doug. And, that's a great opportunity for us to work together and prioritize. We work well with Regional Solutions, part of the governor's office, Annette Liba and her team. We have COACT, which is an opportunity for all the communities to get together and help ODOT prioritize traffic infrastructure opportunities and funding and prioritization. As Tammy mentioned, we have the regional administrators gathering every other month, I think it is. And just to name a few, Deschutes Basin Board of Control. So we have all the irrigators, irrigation districts moving, and that's also part of the Central Oregon Cities discussion on a monthly basis where we have a water meeting incorporated in the Central Oregon Cities. So I think it's super, super important. And I think that Central Oregon as a whole has benefited greatly through the years, certainly through the 13 years I've been doing this. I think you and I are about the same, Eric, and we've gotten a lot of things accomplished, and even though, if you look at Prineville, we're not on that 97 corridor like Corey, you and I are kind of outliers there a little bit, but it benefits us all. Those trucks, the transportation web, they've all got to make their way through 97 to get to Prineville, and we also have worked together. In COAC, for example, we've worked together with communities with ODOT, and we've been able to benefit the City of Prineville Railroad, which is an integral part and probably a big part of the rail future for all of Central Oregon, not just Prineville. So that's just a couple examples. Water's huge. We got to stay together on that. Transportation is incredibly important for our future and how we approach some of these major challenges, whether it's homelessness, whether it's how we allocate water resources, our wetland projects, and coming up with innovative new ways to manage how we dispose and utilize water. And just while I'm on that subject, and let me give you an example of how that might work. So Prineville we weren't one of the first communities in Central Oregon to put in a wetland system which revolutionized the way we manage wastewater. But out of that came an opportunity. And what that opportunity is, it's not that far of a stretch when you have that natural wetland system to move that water into actually drinking water standards. So, and it's kind of awful to think about, make a beer out of wastewater. But my point is this, in the case of what might happen, and we've set it up in Prineville to do this, is actually have a closed loop system where we recycle that water. It could go to industrial use, it can go to irrigation. And actually could really, truly, and it's happened in cities like San Francisco and San Diego, where they do recycle the water back into drinking water standards. So I think it's those type of things that really Central Oregon is on the leading edge of some very innovative solutions in terms of how we manage those environmental resources. And I think we should all be really proud that we're part of that. And the reason we're part of that is exactly what Tammy just said, is we're all working together and pulling the rope the same way. And that makes a difference.
Well, on that note, thank you all for being here today. And I'd like to thank Gus Burril, Eric King, Steve Forrester, Jeff Wullschlager, Cory Misley, and Keith Witcosky for your time and for your passion and just for all that you do. And I'm going to turn it over to Kim Gammon.
Thank you so much to Tammy and the gentlemen for being here today. And thank you to Janet Greger, who helped plan this forum and keep us on track. We could not bring you these forums, especially in a hybrid format, without our sponsors and members. So if you're not currently a member, please talk to me or one of our board members, or visit cityclubco.org or contact me anytime. I also want to thank our elected leaders here today, Commissioner Phil Chang, DA John Hummel, Representative Jason Kropf, Mayor Sally Russell, Parks and Rec Board Member Ariel Mendez, and Councilor Kat Zwicker. In April, join us for our partnership with the League of Women Voters of Deschutes County when we're going to present the contested races. We're going to do congressional districts 2 and 5 and one of the seats in the Deschutes County Commission as candidate forums, and those will be virtual. Thank you everyone for being here today. Please continue to cultivate conversation about issues that connect us to build a strong community. Thank you guys.